A confirmed polar vortex collapse is now officially underway that will completely devastate weather patterns across North America for the rest of February and potentially into March. Scientists have confirmed that the massive stratospheric warming event we've been tracking has reached critical levels, triggering the most significant polar vortex disruption we've seen in over a decade. This isn't just another winter storm. This is a complete breakdown of the atmospheric circulation that normally keeps Arctic air locked away from populated areas. The consequences for millions of Americans are going to be absolutely catastrophic, and the timing couldn't be worse. The stratospheric warming event that triggered this collapse has now exceeded all expectations. Temperatures in the Arctic stratosphere have risen by more than 50 degrees Celsius in just over a week, creating a domino effect that's sending shockwaves through the entire northern hemisphere's weather patterns. The polar vortex, which normally spins like a tight whirlpool over the North Pole, has been stretched, distorted, and is now splitting into multiple pieces. Current satellite data shows the vortex has already begun fragmenting, with one major lobe pushing toward North America and another toward Eurasia. This fragmentation is releasing massive volumes of Arctic air that have been contained for months, and all of that frigid air has to go somewhere. Unfortunately, for millions of Americans, that somewhere is straight down into the continental United States. The European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts and the Global Forecast System are showing unprecedented agreement on what's coming. Both major modeling systems are depicting a complete reversal of the zonal winds that hold the polar vortex together. When these winds reverse, it's the atmospheric equivalent of a dam breaking, releasing a flood of Arctic air southward. But here's what makes this particular collapse so devastating: the timing and the persistence. We're not looking at a typical 3 to 5 day Arctic blast. Current forecasts suggest this disrupted pattern could persist for 4 or 6 weeks or longer, essentially turning the remainder of February and early March into an extended deep freeze for much of the eastern United States. The mechanism driving this collapse is absolutely fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Planetary waves, massive undulations in the atmosphere, have been propagating upward from the troposphere into the stratosphere. These waves carry enormous amounts of energy, and when they break in the stratosphere, they release that energy as heat, rapidly warming the polar regions. This warming disrupts the pressure gradient that maintains the polar vortex's circulation. As the vortex weakens, it begins to wobble and stretch. Eventually, it can no longer maintain its circular shape and splits apart, allowing Arctic air to spill southward along the eastern sides of the fragments. What we're seeing now is textbook polar vortex collapse behavior, but on a scale that's rare even in the climatological record. The temperature departures in the stratosphere are approaching levels we haven't seen since some of the most memorable winter weather events of the past several decades. The surface impacts are already becoming apparent. Temperature forecasts for mid-February show widespread departures of 20-30 degrees below normal across the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and Northeast. Some areas could see temperature anomalies approaching 40 degrees below average, which would shatter countless daily record lows. But it's not just about the cold. This pattern is going to be incredibly conducive to winter storm development. When you have Arctic air masses colliding with more moderate air, you create strong temperature gradients that serve as fuel for explosive storm development. The positioning of the fragmented vortex suggests multiple opportunities for significant winter storms across the eastern United States. The Winter Storm Severity Index from NOAA is already lighting up like a Christmas tree for the extended period. Major to extreme winter weather impacts are forecast across large portions of the Midwest, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast. We're not just talking about one storm. We're looking at the potential for multiple high-impact winter weather events. Energy infrastructure across the affected regions is about to face its biggest test of the winter. Heating demand is going to skyrocket, just as we're potentially dealing with widespread power outages from ice and snow. Natural gas supplies could be strained to the breaking point. Rolling blackouts become a real possibility when demand exceeds capacity for extended periods. Agricultural impacts are going to be severe and long-lasting. Livestock across the affected regions will face life-threatening conditions for weeks. Any crops that might have started showing early spring growth could be devastated by the prolonged cold. The economic impact on farming communities could be enormous. Transportation networks are going to be repeatedly disrupted. Airlines are already preparing for what could be weeks of flight cancellations and delays. Interstate highways could become impassable during storm events. supply chains that are still recovering from previous winter weather are about to face another major disruption. The human cost is what's most concerning. Emergency shelters are going to face unprecedented demand for extended periods. Heating assistance programs could be overwhelmed. Emergency medical services will see increases in cold-related injuries and illnesses. The psychological impact of dealing with extreme cold for weeks on end shouldn't be underestimated. What makes this collapse particularly dangerous is that it's happening during what's already been an extreme winter. Many areas are still dealing with damage from previous storms. Power grids that have been repeatedly stressed are now facing their ultimate test. Emergency resources that have been depleted are about to be pushed beyond their limits. The polar vortex fragments aren't just going to sit stationary either. They're going to move and evolve, creating a constantly changing pattern of Arctic outbreaks. Just when one region starts to recover, another blast of frigid air could arrive. This creates a relentless pattern that wears down both infrastructure and people. European weather patterns are going to be affected as well. The other fragment of the polar vortex is going to bring unseasonable cold to much of northern and eastern Europe. The UK could see Arctic conditions extending well into March. Scandinavia could experience some of the coldest weather in years. The atmospheric dynamics that created this collapse are still active. The planetary wave pattern that triggered the initial warming shows little sign of weakening. This suggests that even after this current collapse runs its course, conditions could remain favorable for additional disruptions later in the winter or early spring. Climate researchers are already calling this one of the most significant stratospheric warming events on record. The rapidity and magnitude of the temperature increases in the polar stratosphere are approaching historic levels. This will be studied for years as an example of how quickly atmospheric patterns can shift from normal to extreme. Emergency management officials across potentially affected regions are scrambling to prepare for what could be a multi-week crisis. Warming centers are being readied. Emergency supplies are being stockpiled. Mutual aid agreements are being activated in preparation for widespread infrastructure failures. The economic implications extend far beyond immediate storm cleanup costs. Energy markets are already showing volatility as traders anticipate massive demand spikes. Insurance companies are bracing for claims from weather-related damage. The broader economy could feel effects as transportation and commerce are repeatedly disrupted. This isn't just another winter weather story. This is a fundamental breakdown of one of the most important features of our planet's atmospheric circulation. The polar vortex is one of the key mechanisms that regulates temperature differences between the poles and the equator. When it collapses, those regulatory mechanisms fail, and the results can be catastrophic. For those in the path of this collapsed vortex, preparation isn't just recommended, it's essential for survival. Stock up on non-perishable food, water, medications, and heating supplies now while they're still available. Have backup heating sources ready. Make sure vehicles are winterized. Create emergency communication plans with family members. The next 4-6 weeks are going to test the resilience of American infrastructure and communities in ways we haven't seen in years. This polar vortex collapse is confirmed, it's happening now, and February is about to become absolutely catastrophic for millions of people.